This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 881 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. Thanks for tuning in. I don't draft off of projections. People sometimes give me a weird look when I say that, but I don't think you should take one singular median outcome for a player, which is what a projection is, and use that as the only data point when you're drafting. There's variance to projections. That's one reason why. You may hate that I talk about variance so much on the show, but it's true. We can say that a certain backup running back will only score 75 PPR points this year. But if that backup starter gets hurt in week 1, then that projection becomes meaningless. It's not to say that that's a common occurrence. It's to say that we know projections can go south, and they can go south in a hurry. Now, to that point, projections don't always properly capture range of outcomes. A rookie or a second-year player probably going to have a wider range of outcomes than a player who's been in the same offense with the same team for years. There's more ambiguity with that younger player. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes that's bad. But projections will show you just one final number for both the veteran and the younger player, that fantasy point total. Most systems aren't giving you a range of outcomes. And even if they are giving you a range of outcomes, there's still a lot of variance to that too. And let's be honest, there are points in your fantasy draft where you shift your focus when it comes to range of outcomes. In the early rounds, you may be looking for that median output. You may want a little safety. In round 15, round 16, why do you care about a player's floor? You should be looking at his ceiling and what he can become. This doesn't make projections meaningless, of course. They can give you an idea of where a player should be drafted. And they can also help you wrap your head around potential volume in an offense, or whether or not something truly is possible. The actual process of building projections is often more helpful to me than the projection itself. Because when building them, you're finding things out about players and teams that you might not have otherwise realized. And that's what this episode I do each year is all about. I'm here to talk about some of the interesting things that I saw and learned while building projections this year. Now, before getting started, I've got a couple of things I need to talk to you guys about. First, take a swing at Pick'em on Underdog during the next golf major. Underdog has the biggest offerings in the game, including full round projections and single hole stats. Get your entries in before the action starts, or wait to see how your favorite golfers are doing with in-game Pick'em. It's all your choice. Download the Underdog Fantasy app today and sign up using code LATEROUND. New customers will receive a player special plus a deposit offer upon signing up. And that brings me to the second thing I want to mention. The Late Round Draft Guide is live and ready for pre-order. The Draft Guide's different than the Prospect Guide. Instead of a guide focused on prospects, it's a guide focused on your season-long fantasy football leagues. Yes, we're getting closer and closer to those drafts. This is year 3 of the guide, and I plan on making it better than ever. I'll be talking game theory, players to target, players to avoid, late round dart throws, and so much more. It's then updated weekly through August, so you're always getting up-to-date information for your drafts. You can pre-order it now over on lateround.com for $19.99. When it goes out on July 1st, you'll get an email with a download link. But I've got a special offer for you this year. If you're new to Underdog Fantasy, you've never signed up, if you sign up and make a deposit with promo code LATEROUND, you not only receive a deposit bonus, but you'll also get a free late round draft guide. That guide will be emailed to you when it releases on July 1st. So there are so many reasons to sign up on Underdog. Do it today by heading to underdogfantasy.com or by downloading the app. And when you sign up, make sure you use promo code LATEROUND. You need that promo code and you need to make a deposit if you want a free late round draft guide. Again, that's promo code LATEROUND. I know Bijan Robinson didn't totally come to fruition last year, but this year, my projections think that he's going to come to fruition. Atlanta has a whole new offense this season. The coaching staff changed, and they've got Zach Robinson running the show on offense. He comes from the Sean McVay tree, which is one that's not nearly as conservative as what we saw with Arthur Smith in Atlanta. You've got a team that's going to go from using the least amount of 11 personnel in the league to one that's going to be closer to the top of the league. That's what we've seen traditionally from this coaching tree. Robinson has already said that he wants to play fast and he wants to play aggressively, which could mean more overall volume in this offense, which is great for fantasy purposes. Now, my projections take a top-down approach. They start at the team level before getting to the player level. So the fact that the Falcons should score more touchdowns this year, which I think is a near lock given they only scored 31 last year, was one of the lowest marks in the league, but more touchdowns, more plays run, that's more fantasy goodness. The big question mark will be how Bijan Robinson is deployed. Something I've talked about a lot through the years is the impact that mobile quarterbacks can have on their teammates in fantasy football. It's a big deal for pass catchers, and it's still somewhat of a deal at running back too. Because when mobile quarterbacks take off and run, they're taking a play all by themselves. Teams only have a certain number of plays that they're going to run in a game. If the quarterback is running, that takes one of those plays away. Now, you can obviously combat that with good efficiency and just more plays run. But when it comes to our running backs and wide receivers, we want as many plays available as possible. Like if Lamar Jackson's under center, there are fewer plays available for running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends than if someone like Kirk Cousins is under center, which is what Atlanta has this year. Because Cousins isn't going to run that much. That means that Robinson has a little bit more room to split a backfield with someone like Tyler Algier. Like realistically, Robinson can get to a 55% rush share in this offense, while Algier is closer to 30%. And that would allow both of these backs to hit pretty good volume marks. Robinson can get to that 230, 240 attempt range, Algier 130 or so. That's why I don't agree with this idea that if Robinson has a big season, Algier is going to become a zero, or he needs to become a zero. Algier can still be involved. What's nice is that there's a little bit more room for both of these running backs on the ground because Kirk Cousins lacks mobility. And we know that Robinson is already an elite pass catcher at the position. That's going to be there. So I think Robinson is one of the very few backs in fantasy football who can compete with Christian McCaffrey this year. He looks really good in projections. The phrase "he's a better pick in best ball" that definitely gets thrown around too loosely in the fantasy football space, by myself included at times. But I do think with Green Bay Packers pass catchers, they're just better best ball picks than managed league picks. There are a lot of good but not elite weapons in Green Bay, at least right now. Some of them have a shot to become elite. I'd put Jaden Reed at the top of that list. But there are just solid weapons throughout that lineup after the Packers absolutely crushed the 2023 draft. Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave are both capable tight ends. Jaden Reed, like I said, he's coming off a rookie season where his yards per route run was above 2. And so was Dontavian Wicks's, who I think is just a massive value in all formats. I love throwing the Wicks dart right now. Get this, since 2011, there have only been 26 rookie wide receivers who ran 200 or more routes while hitting a 2.0 yards per route run rate. Just 26. That's only 2 rookie wideouts a year. Of those 26, we have next season data on 21 of them. Because 5 wide receivers, Puka Nacua, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, Tank Dell, and Rashee Rice, got there last season as rookies. But among the 21 players who had 200 or more routes and a 2.0 yards per route run rate as rookies, each of them played at least 7 games as second-year players. Guess how many of those players scored double-digit PPR points per game in year 2? 18 of them. And 13 of the 21 hit 14 PPR points per game. That's a lower-end wide receiver 2 season. Now, I'm not saying that's the automatic fate for Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks. Many of the wide receivers who were able to have big sophomore seasons in the NFL after hitting a 2.0 yards per route run rate as rookies, many of them entered the NFL as elite prospects, like Jamar Chase, Odell Beckham, Justin Jefferson, AJ Green, and so on. My thing is, though, for someone like Wicks, you're not paying a premium whatsoever. Why not take the chance? That's why I do think range of outcomes wise, he's the most intriguing Packers wideout right now. But on the projections front, things are really hard to figure out. We didn't always get to see Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, and Romeo Doubs all healthy at once last year. But they were around the playoffs. They were at least active. Injuries definitely were still lingering, but they were active. But just to show you how wild it is to project this group, in their playoff game against the Cowboys, none of the wide receivers hit an 80% route participation. And then in round 2, things just shifted a little bit. We saw Wicks run fewer routes, Jaden Reed ran more. I'm sure you guys remember some of this from your playoff contests in fantasy. It was relatively unpredictable, and that's the fear heading into 2024. They have a lot of above average to really good players, but they don't have these elite guys just yet who stand out, who are going to command absolute 25%, 26% target shares. And what makes it really tough is that Christian Watson, when he was healthy last year, he was pacing the group in target share. It's just a mess overall. I still think that Wicks, though, is an interesting target because when you consider cost, it just makes too much sense. And I think getting a piece of each of these players is absolutely fine in best ball. You're looking for those spiked weeks. It could just be a headache without an injury in a managed league. When the Rams took Blake Corum in the draft last month, Kyren Williams' fantasy stock took a hit. Instead of the backfield being all Kyren Williams, he's now got to fight off a pretty good day 2 prospect in Blake Corum. Now, I get the concerns, but my projections still see Kyren as a solid enough low-end RB1 in fantasy. At the moment, I have Kyren projected for 237 carries and 54 targets. That's definitely a per-game downgrade from where he was last year. No one should be selling Kyren Williams this year as someone who's going to see the same year-over-year output. That's almost definitely not happening. He scored over 21 PPR points per game. With that being said, you might hear 237 carries and say, well, that means that you don't think Blake Corum will be that involved. I don't think that's true. I still have Corum for about 140 rush attempts in that offense. And that's mostly been echoed by the Rams front office. At Coach Speak Index on Twitter, it's a great Twitter account for you guys to check out. They posted a video where Rams GM Les Snead said that the Blake Corum pick is, quote, so we don't just totally run down Kyren. To me, that doesn't scream 50-50 split. It means they have a semi-undersized back in Williams that they really like, but they need him to stay healthy. They probably don't want a repeat of last year. That's consistent with the post-draft take that I had on this show. I don't think the Corum pick was that surprising when you put yourself in the Rams' shoes. They really had issues behind Williams last year. This gives them some stability. It also doesn't totally torpedo Kyren Williams' value. Now, with all that being said, I can't say that Williams is some ideal selection in early best ball drafts, or that he'll be a great pick in your redraft leagues. I'd describe his current draft position as fine. I'm just more inclined to wait 2 rounds and get players who have arguably better workload projections. There's a pocket of running backs in drafts right now who all project to be potential bell cows, but they go significantly later than someone like Kyren Williams or someone like Josh Jacobs or Derrick Henry. And I don't think that gap should be as big as it is. 2 of them were in a write-up that I did last week in the Late Round Fantasy Football newsletter. Those 2 being Rachaad White and Isaiah Pacheco. And I think that you could throw Joe Mixon in here too. From strictly a projection standpoint, those 3 running backs really don't profile all that differently in points per game compared to a Kyren Williams or a Josh Jacobs. I think Jacobs and Williams have good team situations and contingent upside if their rookie backfield teammates get hurt, and that's a plus. But look at White, Pacheco, and Mixon. White's biggest competition right now is a day 3 Bucky Irving, who might be able to steal some receiving work, but that's also a piece to White's game that's pretty good. White had arguably a better receiving profile than Irving entering the league. In fact, I'd say that it was more impressive than Irving's. Rachaad White was a baller in college as a receiver, and he's been a strong receiver in the NFL too. Dave Canales not being in Tampa Bay, that might hurt Rachaad White, but White still has a strong projection here in 2024. Isaiah Pacheco, he's on a team in Kansas City that I'm going to talk about in a second. But I don't see why we should expect his workload to dramatically change year over year when last year he was a solid RB2 with upside. He was one of 7 running backs that hit a 75% running back rush share per game rate a season ago. And he was at about a 10% target share. And the Chiefs didn't do anything significant to that running back room. And then Joe Mixon, he goes to Houston. He's competing with Dameon Pierce. The Texans told us what they thought about Dameon Pierce last year when they gave Devin Singletary more carries down the stretch. They don't like him in that scheme. Say what you want about Mixon's efficiency. If he sees touches in that offense that's filled with firepower, he's probably going to post some fantasy production. I just don't understand the groupings that we see over on Underdog, where a guy like Derrick Henry or Josh Jacobs or even Kyron Williams, where those players are going pretty significantly earlier than a Rachaad White, Isaiah Pacheco, and even Joe Mixon. Now, I like White and Pacheco more, but the Mixon thing is a worthwhile call out too. Now, I talked about Isaiah Pacheco. Now, let's talk about the Chiefs' offense. They were totally average on offense last year compared to the rest of the league, at least at scoring touchdowns. Kansas City finished last season with just 37 offensive touchdowns. During their 5 previous seasons with Patrick Mahomes under center, and some of those seasons being 16 game ones instead of 17 game ones, the Chiefs scored 66, 46, 53, and 59 touchdowns. They were at 37 last year. They added to the offense this offseason, and they could just see general regression heading their way. The Chiefs scored a touchdown on every 161 total yards last year. That was a bottom half number in the league. It's also by far their highest mark in yards to touchdowns since Mahomes took over. Their previous high with Mahomes was 136 yards per touchdown. Chances are the Chiefs are going to be better offensively this year than they were last year, even with everything going on with Rashee Rice. And that means players in that offense, Isaiah Pacheco, Travis Kelce, they look better in my projections than what their ADPs are showing over on Underdog. Devon Achane had a season last year like we've never seen before. His projection now is really difficult. Throughout NFL history, we've seen 27 running back seasons where the running back carried the ball 100 or more times while hitting a 6.0 yards per carry average. Devon Achane's the first player to get over the 7 mark, and he was at 7.8. Like, his season within basically any efficiency metric was otherworldly. I don't think we should project the same kind of efficiency year over year, of course. But it's reasonable to make him the most efficient back in the projections, no? I think it's natural to project Devon Achane to be the best running back in terms of efficiency across the NFL. Now, there are still some things that we've got to figure out with Achane, which is what makes him such a difficult player to evaluate in fantasy this year. Efficiency can absolutely matter in fantasy football, especially this efficiency. But in the end, volume always wins. And last season, when Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane were both healthy, we saw Mostert get a little bit more work on the ground. Achane got a little bit more work through the air. I think we should project a similar thing to happen this year, with maybe some upside leaning towards Achane on the ground because Raheem Mostert is 32 years old. But then you factor a few more things here. First, Miami may have a tough time posting 57 touchdowns again. Typically, we do see regression from one season to the next when teams score that many touchdowns. It doesn't mean Miami's going to be worse as a team. It just means they may not convert as well. They also added Jalen Wright to the mix, and he's an awesome fit in this Miami system. They didn't have a solid third body in that backfield last year. So how much does he factor into all of this? I think he probably hurts Mostert more than Achane, but it's still another thing for Achane to deal with. So you've got regression at the team level and the individual level, and then you have Wright stepping in too. Achane has insane upside. I'm never going to tell you to not draft Devon Achane. I'm merely pointing out that his projection has him closer to a mid to low end RB2 when people are drafting him as a low end RB1. And best ball can definitely help a situation like this. And like I said, if things break Achane's way, it's clear that the upside is crazy. It just comes down to what type of fantasy manager you are. Are you willing to take on that kind of risk in round 2? To me, I'm still more inclined to go with a wide receiver there and snag some of the bell cows that I just talked about before. Some of those guys in the lower end RB1 range, because they're getting drafted 2 or 3 rounds later in best ball right now. One of the things that I do when I'm building projections is I look at team target shares at different positions. So I can sit here and say, Justin Jefferson had this target share last year, so maybe that's a good starting point for this year. But instead of going that deep at first, I just take a step back and look at team positional target shares. That can sometimes give us some insight on how the offense runs. One of the glaring team target shares from last year occurred in Denver. Over 32% of their targets went to the running back position. That was the highest mark in the league, and it was the 4th highest mark since 2011. As we know, Sean Payton went to Denver last year. And when you look at the top team running back target share season since 2011, there's a lot of Sean Payton in there. This is pretty wild, but 8 of the top 20 team running back target share seasons since 2011 came from teams that were coached by Sean Payton. Now you look at what they have at wide receiver, which is unproven talent aside from Courtland Sutton, and then at tight end, which is also unproven talent. Given that, it's not hard to imagine a ton of targets being funneled to the running back position once again. And that's why I've been on Jaleel McLaughlin all offseason. I think he's one of the best values that you're going to find in best ball right now, too. The Audric Estime pick in the draft was more of a Javonte Williams related pick. Estime is a bigger bodied dude who doesn't profile that much as a pass catcher. McLaughlin, as I pointed out earlier this offseason, he was a monster last year. He beat teammates Samaje Perine and Javonte Williams in expected points added per carry, success rate, rushing yards over expected per carry, 10-plus yard run rate, 20-plus yard run rate, PFF rush grade, PFF receiving grade, PFF pass blocking grade, and he was better than Williams in yards per route run. Don't be surprised if the Broncos are near the top of the league and running back target share once again. History tells us that's a pretty good bet. Now, I mentioned it earlier, but mobile quarterbacks can hurt the passing volume in their offenses. I talk about it in detail on an episode from last year around this time, episode 766. And that leads me to the Indianapolis Colts. Anthony Richardson is seemingly going to be healthy this year. He only really played a significant number of snaps in 2 games last season. In one of those games, the Colts' dropback rate was totally fine at 61%, but in the other one, it was below 50%. We don't know exactly how run-heavy this Indianapolis offense is going to be this year. But considering Anthony Richardson ran the ball 20 times in those starts, we should probably project a below-average pass rate. Since 2011, there have been 47 teams who saw 100 or more rush attempts from their quarterbacks in a season. The average rank and pass rate among those teams was 25.6, meaning the average team among that group ended up ranking 25th to 26th in pass rate in a season where their quarterbacks ran the ball 100 or more times. Only the 2022 Arizona Cardinals were able to rank higher than 10th in pass rate, and they had exactly 100 quarterback attempts. They were also a 4-win team, so GameScript was dictating a more pass-heavy game plan. The Colts are projected to be better than that. They're more than likely not going to be a 4-win team, and their quarterback is projected to run more than that. With the addition of Adonai Mitchell, it just seems like it's going to be hard for Colts pass catchers to really break through and be weapons in fantasy football, Michael Pittman aside. But if Pittman does lose some target share, whether it be to A.D. Mitchell or Josh Downs, who I like a lot, even he could be in trouble. I still think he can get to 140 targets, but there's a very real chance that Pittman's the only Colts player to get over 100 targets this year. Let's continue to talk about mobile quarterbacks. Let's end today's show with 2 quarterbacks who I think everyone should be targeting: Kyler Murray and Jaden Daniels. Honestly, I think the following stat that I'm going to throw your way right now kind of explains why you should always be targeting mobile quarterbacks in fantasy football. Kyler Murray has scored 5 or more fantasy points per game via rushing in 4 of his 5 seasons. In the other season where he didn't get to 5, he was at 4.9. So he was basically at 5. Since 2011, we've had 35 quarterback seasons where the quarterback threw it 300 or more times while running the ball for 5 or more rushing points per game. To put that another way, they were their team's starter. They threw the ball 300 or more times, and they were also scoring a lot of points on the ground per game. Of those 35 quarterbacks, the lowest number of fantasy points scored per game was 17.3. That was Josh Allen during his rookie season. 31 of the 35 quarterbacks hit 18 points per game. That would have been a lower-end QB1 season last year. Now, I think we should be pretty confident that Kyler Murray can get there, because look at how he's performed throughout his career. And Kyler's upside is pretty evident with Marvin Harrison now in the mix. The projections really like him. But don't sleep on Jaden Daniels either. He may not be Lamar Jackson on the ground, but what about RG3? What if he has that kind of campaign? I mean, after all, he rushed for 2,000 yards over his final 2 seasons at LSU. And Cliff Kingsbury, his offensive coordinator now, he's not a bad coach for this when you consider what he did with Kyler Murray from a fantasy perspective. Kingsbury's offenses are usually up-tempo too, which also really helps for fantasy football. So Murray's my favorite quarterback target right now. And Daniels, he's a great target too. The projections definitely like both of them. But that's it for today's show. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you get subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Thanks for listening, everyone. It's a mailbag week. I'll talk to you on Friday with that episode. But also, there's the first episode of Becoming a Best Ball Bro, which will drop on Wednesday. I'll talk to you then.